Well, hello again. You are watching Brian Northmore Photography. It's my mission to inspire the photographic community by passing on my knowledge, passion and skills. I'm a photographic judge, lecturer and workshop leader based in southwest England. You can subscribe anytime. Hit the button or the watermark and don't forget to tick the bell icon to get those updates. A few months ago I was in the Lake District photographing these trees. Now in that video, I will link to it in the description, I said I may show you my editing process. So this week, join me in Lightroom. I'm going to show you my Photo Merge to Panorama process and explain what all those tick buttons, sliders and options are for. And to finish off, I've included my basic raw edits in the Develop module. As always, if you have any questions, let's have them in the comments. Keep watching to find out about my new presentation format. Well, hello. It's been a bit of a rough start to 2020. And this certainly isn't the video that I intended to put out early in the year. It's one that should be going out much later on when I'd explain to you what I've done with the office and the changes that I've made and how that was going to hopefully improve the videos that I make for you and also allow me to start a new project and something which I can offer back to the photographic community a little bit more. But that's going to have to wait for about 8 to 10 weeks because when I was doing it I sliced through a tendon in my finger. So I'm probably without being able to finish it off for about another 8 to 10 weeks, and then hopefully I can get back on track and start doing some more things. In the meantime, I'm going to produce new content, I'm going to bring new things to you, and I'm going to use this space to do it because I did manage to get this wall painted and everything done before I cut my finger, so I can do some videos from this space and do some tutorials. So today's video is basically a photo merging panorama in Lightroom, a tutorial for photographers. Now it is a little bit of a mouthful, I get that, but I couldn't really shorten the title without sort of changing what the video was about. So I thought for it for a long time and decided just to go with what I had. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the photo merge process in Lightroom as well. I'm going to show you a very brief sort of workflow demonstration inside Photoshop. But I'm going to start with my idea behind the photograph and what that's actually about. So on the next slide I'm going to show you a little clip from where I was taking the picture out in the field. Now if you actually want to see all of that video, then please do so. There will be a link to it in the description, and I'll put a little pop-up on the top of the screen which will also take you to that video as well. So the idea was that I would use this tree in the middle as the main subject. The reason I wanted to do that was I just like the shape of it and I like the way it sort of could potentially stand out from the background. Now I'm predominantly a black and white worker, so I wanted to do it in black and white as well. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit more about that when I get into Photoshop. I took the picture on a 300mm lens and it was set at about 200mm at f4. F4 was so that I could throw the background very slightly out of focus to sort of increase that separation between the main subject and the background. 200mm was really out of necessity rather than anything else. 300mm would have been better, but if I'd stepped backwards further to do that, I would have had another hedge and trees in front of me, so it wouldn't actually have been possible to take the picture. Moving forward, wouldn't have allowed me to get enough of the tree into the picture, and using a wider angled lens so that I could move forward and do it would have meant that it would have changed the relationship between the elements in the picture and I wouldn't have achieved what I was trying to do. So obviously different photographers work in different ways, and a different photographer would have come up with a completely different style of image. That's one of the beauties of photography. So we're going to go into Lightroom in a moment and I'm going to show you how to select the pictures. I'm then going to use the Photo Merge command and from that go into Panorama Merge. I'm going to use spherical projection. I'm going to show you how I'm going to tidy up the edges of the picture, and then we're going to do some basic edits in the Develop module. So let's not hang around anymore, let's go straight into Lightroom and have a look at how I deal with the picture.
Okay, so here we are inside Lightroom. So just for a bit more information, if I haven't already mentioned it, I use Adobe Lightroom Classic, and currently I get that through the Creative Cloud, and I'm using the photographer's subscription for that. My Lightroom setup is pretty standard, to be honest. So there's not really a lot to tell you about my actual setup inside it. I use the normal sort of information panes on the left and the right hand side, as most people do. And what I do is I import my raw files by year, and then sort of by a month or by an event or by something that I did. So the files that we want to look at are actually stored inside 2019 August Lakes 5D Mark IV. So I've already got that folder open. So all I need to do is scroll down through to the pictures we want to look at. They're probably in this area here by all the trees. Right, okay, so here we are. Now you may remember from some of my other videos that when I take pictures like this, whether I'm doing focus stacking, whether I'm doing bracketing for an exposure blend, or whether I'm doing a panoramic, as I was in this case, I put my hand in front of the lens. The reason for that's quite simple. If you look here, you'll see you've got a picture of the palm of my hand and another one there. So I know that those two pictures inside there are one set together. And I also know that the ones taken after that are the next ones as well. So these two pictures here are the ones that I've actually selected to work on. And you just do that by clicking on that one, Command, click the next one, and that's it. So I've selected those two. So once those two are selected, it's very easy to go in and do the merge operation. Now what I'm going to do at this stage is absolutely nothing. I would normally go in and do some raw file manipulation, and also look at changing the sort of like the calibration of the lenses, the focus points, etc., and deal with any distortion in the lens that we might have. But Lightroom takes care of that for you when you actually do the photo merge. So if we just go up to the top here, then we can go up to photo, we can come down to photo merge, and then we've got three options. We've got HDR, panorama, or HDR. Well, we're just doing a normal panorama photograph, so we just need to click on panorama. It's going to then open up a screen, and it's going to load up a preview of the image that we're going to look at. So image preview, quite easy, quite self-explanatory really. It shows us what the image will look like when the two are combined together. And there's three different ways to actually combine these together. And the way that it does it is spherical, cylindrical, or perspective. Now it's picked cylindrical first, but I'm going to go back to the top with spherical and then talk to you about each of these things and what these settings are for in turn before we actually finally hit the merge button and commit it to do the work for us. So let's start with spherical. So spherical, if you think about a ball or a sphere, that's the shape that it tries to mold your pictures around. So it's best used for sort of like 360-degree panoramas, for example, 360-degree views, where you want to pan up, down, left and right at the same time. So to take your images and wrap them around a sphere, so you're looking at a full 360-degree in any direction. Cylindrical is probably the easiest to understand and the one that I use the most, as I think it's most useful for photographers doing this sort of work. So cylindrical works on the theory that if you wrap your pictures around a cylinder and then flatten that cylinder out, that's what you would get. So basically it's flattening out a curve. So it's imagining that you've got a real wide curve and you flatten that one out. And that's what we're going to be using today. So the way that perspective works is that it uses the central image as the reference point for the picture. What you're doing then with it is it works from the outside of there. And what you tend to get is you'll get a lot of white edges which aren't filled in at the top and bottom going out from both sides. And that doesn't always work very well. If I just shake the mouse there, look down at the bottom, you can see where it is. So you would get a lot more of that. These are only two pictures, so it's not too much of a problem. So we're going to stick with cylindrical. The other thing which you can do with it is boundary warps. Basically, what it will do is it will manipulate the image to fill the edges of the frame in. So it warps the merge results to sort of fills rectangular image boundaries, so it preserves more of the image content. Now sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Now we can do it on here and we can get it up to pretty much fill those edges in for us. And you can do it to varying degrees. But what you tend to find with it, if you have to do it to an extreme, is it almost like twists and rotates your image slightly. So sometimes it can cause some issues with verticals. It can cause some issues with horizon lines. So I generally don't use it. The other option that you've got for filling in these edges is you can use literally fill edges. And when you click on the fill edges button, what it basically does is it says, okay, well, what happens then if I look at the pixels in that area and take a good stab at filling them in myself? And that's the result that you normally get. But I'm not going to use that either. I'm going to use auto crop, which is what it basically does what it says on the tin, really. It'll automatically crop out the edges of the frame which aren't filled in completely. Now, the reason I do that is because, as I do with a lot of my photography, when you are trying to do things inside camera and get them right, if you take into consideration that you're going to lose a bit of the top, bottom, maybe the left and right of the image, and leave a bit of space around it, then you don't need to worry about Photoshop guessing for you what it is you wanted. You can just use the auto crop or even crop it manually if you prefer, and then that will give you the option of actually doing it yourself. But auto crop's fine for what we're doing. What I'm also going to do is use the auto settings. So that'll automatically apply some lens correction for me. It'll deal with highlights, shadows and details. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do that myself because I like to have control over the I like to have control over the final result. But because the output from this is going to be a DNG, so effectively a RAW file, when we've actually committed it and merged these two images together, we're going to open them up again in the develop module, and that will enable us to make some changes ourselves afterwards. You can also do something called create stack. Now, creating a stack is nothing to do with stacking layers or anything else inside of Photoshop. What it basically does is it allows you to stack the two images which you've made the panorama from and the panorama itself on top of each other inside Lightroom, so that you've only got that one to worry about. So I'm not going to do that either because I like to see all of the images that I've got. So all we've got to do now is click on merge, and then it will commit all of these things. So up on the top of the screen here, it'll tell us what it's doing, and it says basically that it's creating the panorama. So we've just got to wait for that to finish now, and then we'll be able to open the file up when it's finished doing it. Okay, so it's done that for us. It's created our panorama, and here it is ready for us to open up. So we can open up this image, and as you'll see, it's a DNG file. So because it's a DNG, we can simply open it straight back up in develop as we would with any other RAW file. So let's open it up in develop. And you'll see that really when you just look at the preview in the develop module, it's done a fairly good job on it already. There's a little bit clipping in some of the shadows, highlights that there really aren't any look really fine. So let's go through the panel on the right hand side. So the right hand side, I like to start editing with all of them closed down, because otherwise you end up with panel upon panel upon panel to scroll through and look at, and it can get a little bit confusing to look at. Calibration, not interested in any of that. I don't change that. I'm quite happy with the way it comes in. Effects, in this instance, I'm not going to worry about applying any sort of post-crop vignetting or highlights or any grain or anything to the image. For its general landscape, I'm not going to worry about doing any of these transformations. You could, if you wanted to, if you had some converging verticals or you had some things you wanted to shift, you could do that here. You could actually move things about. It gives you a different set of different updates and a set of different methods by which you can do that, but we don't need to do that with this image. You might if you were doing some architectural work or something, I guess. Lens corrections is in there, but where you can remove chromatic aberration, where you can enable the lens corrections, and it will pick the make, the model, and the profile, and you can automatically change the corrections that the lens makes. But don't forget what I said before. If we click on this little information button down here, Lightroom very kindly comes up with a panel for us and tells us that basically the raw file that we've already worked has had it applied automatically. So there's no reason to do that at all. So thank you very much, Lightroom. We can then go back up to where it says details. So details is where we can apply sharpening, noise reduction, anything associated with that. In this case, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to leave it exactly as it is. I'm not going to alter anything about it. It's not really what this video is about. So we will leave all that shut down. Split toning, once again, I don't want to introduce any sort of tones or colours into the highlights or shadows. HSL, so the hue, saturation and luminance. At the moment, nothing for us to do in that area at all. Tonal curve, I'm going to leave that as it is. And it's mainly in the basic adjustments where I like to make my changes. So it's got some basic adjustments on it which has already come up with. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in looking at is the histogram. What I tend to do is use these little touch buttons at the top a fair bit. If you switch these on, it will show you any highlight clipping in the picture. So that little one up there and that one will do it. What I look at when I'm looking at the histogram is a good balanced histogram. So I can see up on the highlight end that I can probably move the whites up a little bit and upset the black point. So the black point, by moving that, deals with the shadows, and the exposure does the same. So for the purposes of this exercise, if you're not happy with what the auto settings are, you can literally just change them all back to 0. And then we can change it all ourselves if we want to. So what I'm going to do in this case myself, I'm going to move the black point down. So it just starts to pick up there, that's fine. I'm going to centralize the overall exposure a little bit. It won't be that far away from what the auto settings were, to be honest. I'm going to bring the white point up just so it's towards that end, and that's probably the only major difference. And the reason I'm doing that is I want this tree to be much brighter and lighter than what it was on the original one. I'm probably going to give the shadows a little bit more exposure, not a huge amount, just a little bit, because blacks are blacks after all. And that brings that in. And then I'm going to add a little bit of contrast to it, just to let that background sort of stand out. And maybe a little bit of saturation, not a huge amount, tiny bit, maybe a bit of vibrance as well. I might even add in a little bit of something else later on, but I'm not going to bother. I probably won't go any further than that. I'm only really interested in getting a basic image that I can work with within Photoshop. Now if you look at it, these greens look a little bit too harsh, a little bit too strong, and the reason for that is when I do the monochrome conversion later on, I want those to really separate and come out. So when we're happy with it, we can drop out of the develop module and go back into the library, and then we can open this image up in Photoshop. So if we right click on it, so right click on the image like we just have, we can go down to edit in, we can come down to Photoshop, and we're going to open it up as a smart object. And the reason we're going to open it up as a smart object is that if we're not happy with the changes that we make in Photoshop, we can double click on it, it'll open it back up in Camera Raw for us again, which is effectively the develop module, and then we'll be able to make some other additional adjustments to it. So I'm going to open that up in Photoshop, and then as soon as that's opened up and ready to go in a minute, I'll join you then. Okay, well I hope that you found that useful. As I said at the beginning, that's only the Lightroom
part of the video. The next part obviously is going to be going into Photoshop and finishing the image off, so that's going to be in next week's video. So there's nothing more for me to say really, apart from that you can help me out by subscribing. If you do that, then don't forget to hit the bell icon, and give the video a thumbs up or a thumb down, and obviously comment as well. I enjoy seeing all your comments and I do try and reply to them all. Most of all, enjoy your photography and stay safe. I'll see you next week.